Do you think there's going to be any shadow boxing when Limerick meet Tipperary this weekend?
Honestly, I don't really like from a tip point of view. I think they've a lot to gain from putting in a really strong performance. Were they to get a win, I think it would be huge for them at this stage. Limerick, outside of that, the second half against Cork, maybe where they pulled off a good few players. I don't think there's been much shadow boxing going on from them, really. I think they've been trying to win the games. I think they're a good bit ahead of where they were last year, and I think that's by design. No, I don't think so. I think Tip will try and see potentially. I know I mentioned it earlier on the week. Does Seamus Kennedy work potentially on Kyle Hayes if he's playing that half forward? That's going to go up and down the flank, kind of defending as well. Who maybe works on Dermot Burns? Who's going to stop Dermot Burns from getting long shots away? So I don't think there'll be too much shadow boxing, I have to say. If they're playing the first round, it might be different, but I'm not sure what round they're playing in. But I think there's a lot to be benefited, particularly from a Tip point of view, to go and try and get a win at the weekend. And it's not. I don't think it's in Cattle's nature to hold back anyway, and I don't think last year's league will have any bearing on them holding back or anything either. I just think they probably didn't manage the gap between weeks or games 2 and 3 very well, and I'm sure that's something that he's put the finger on already to make sure it doesn't happen this year.
Yeah, it's not like they played terribly against Limerick the first day. It's just they came up short, even though Limerick were down 1 or 2. They still performed quite well. So, yeah, I agree. I think it was the gap to the next game that was the problem. Right, let's just bring it up on screen here. A bit of a tactics board. Now, this is based on Tipperary's. I mean, last week it was much changed against Antrim. So we've kind of, broadly speaking, gone with the team that played against Waterford in the previous game in Semple Stadium. And with Limerick, we've gone with pretty strong team here. It may or may not be exactly this team. Sean Finn isn't starting here in this team because I don't think he was playing last week, so I'm not entirely sure he'll play this week. But obviously he'd start if he's available. But it gave us a good way to just make sure that Casey and Dan Morrissey were starting without having to argue too much about it. So Michael Breen has played full-back. He's also played on the wing. Owen Connolly has played in the full-back line. He can also play, he's been a centre-back for the Tip under-20s in recent years. But this is the big thing that I think that's going to be a standout feature. The two players that mark Seamus Flanagan and Aaron Gillane. So whether they're out the field or in closer to goal. Now, both Michael Breen and Brian O'Mara would be happy in the half-back line, or you could see them playing as a full-back line. Cathal Barrett's obviously not available to mark Peter Casey, so I reckon it'll be Johnny Ryan. It could be Conor McCarthy or someone like that, depending on fitness. But I think that this is the reason that Brian O'Mara and Michael Breen have been playing full-back and alternating is basically to go 2v2 on these exact type of guys in matches that matter. I think it'll be Breen against Flanagan and Brian O'Mara against Gillane, or the other way around, but I see this as being the 2v2, and I think it's very important heading into the summer.
Oh, it is indeed. Yeah, you need to get that. You need to get that right. You need to make sure that there is going to be a good quality of ball going into Gillane and probably Flanagan inside, and you need to make sure that if whoever they're marking is turned or whatever, that they're able to get back, and that they're able to. You have to be able to go toe to toe with the two of them. And I think like Brian O'Mara played out in the half back line against Laois. He obviously played there for UL as well and was one of their best players. But he's kind of John Milan described him to me as a Brendan Maher type player. He's very flexible, isn't he, with where he can play. He could play anywhere, really, probably between 2 and 9, I'd say. And you need to have that flexibility. Even seeing Breen playing at stages wing back as well, that could be a potential sign of where he's going to play. Come Limerick, maybe he
match up with Hegarty
he
Morrissey?
He definitely could. And even like Seamus Kennedy was kind of listed at 7 the last day, even though he's generally played that half forward role. And as I said to you the last week's show, like Cal will definitely try different things. Like he'd no issue with putting Prunty out wing back on Hegarty because he thought he could go toe to toe with him in that Munster game last year. So everything a manager is doing, and definitely looking at Cal, everything he's doing is, it's with a view to long term and how we're going to go forward, but it's also with a view to how are we going to play against Limerick? How are we going to match up against X, Y, and Z? Not sure if Keane Lynch is going to feature. He had a bit of a knock last weekend, so I wouldn't be that surprised if they can put probably Cottle O'Neill in centre forward maybe if he doesn't play. They've got quite a bit of flexibility there as well. And you were saying as well, it's very unlikely that Shane O'Brien or Adam English are going to feature with the new under-20s rule as well, because I think they're playing. That's on Saturday as well now.
Yeah, against Waterford, so that's been changed as well. So even declared Tipperary under-20 game. Now I'm not sure, there wouldn't be any Tipperary players who'd be operating in both at the moment. But that would obviously preclude those guys if they're going to line out with the under-20s, which that seemed to be the plan anyway. But yeah, like Owen Connolly's a big man. He's 6'4", and whether he has the legs to keep with Gerard Hegarty is another thing. But like physically, there's a matchup there that you think, well, potentially that could work if Seamus Kennedy isn't the one to come back, or maybe Seamus Kennedy comes across to Kyle Hayes. I mean, Alan Tynan is a fair machine of a guy to cover ground. So you can see that, like, that's a very industrious Tip half-forward line, isn't it, really? And Noel McGrath may or may not play there, but Gerard O'Connor's been very impressive. And physically, in terms of thundering into these Limerick backs, which Tipperary will want to be able to do, or at very least try and get close to breaking even, it's important to have lads like him. And then I've picked Bonner Maher 14 there. He may or may not start there, but again, the ball probably won't come out too handy if he's there. And then that's a real test for Mark Keogh, whether it's Sean Finn, Mike Casey, or Dan Morrissey, whoever's on him. Huge thing there. But Barry Nash cannot be allowed to dominate things for Tipperary. So I'm not saying necessarily that Jake Morris will be looking to pick him up or whatever, or anything of that sort. You know, it'll be Jake Morris looking to drag him or whoever around the pitch. But how do you set up for the puckouts? If you're setting up the puckouts against Limerick's short puckouts, how do you set up? Do you make sure that, like, you want to drop off because you don't want to do what Limerick did or to Kilkenny in the All-Ireland final, which is basically end up getting destroyed on the puckouts because you pushed up too far. But you don't want to necessarily drop off Barry Nash. You want to basically show them the sidelines, hem them down the sidelines, get tight to the men in the middle, and then force them to drive it long. But it's just a very difficult thing to do against this Limerick team, isn't it?
Yeah, well, Nash is probably not the last person you want to leave. You don't want to leave Nash free. Finn is unbelievably comfortable as well. I'd say if you're talking about, like, if you want to make it as awkward as possible for them, if there's going to be a free puck out, you're probably maybe leaving, like, Dan Morrissey is probably the least comfortable, even though he is very comfortable on the ball, or maybe Mike Casey as well, who you wouldn't necessarily see on the ball. You don't want it, like, Nash is just so comfortable on the ball. Like, he'll just take the ball, he'll look up, and as I said to you on Monday's show, I've noticed, like, the second the ball, the first receiver, as I say, receives the ball, he's not taking the 4 steps and generally going. It's almost like a stick pass straight out of trouble. Again, kind of, they're kind of almost anticipating teams pushing up on that first man and getting the ball away really quickly, and then maybe getting the ball away again. So I just, like, from a Tip point of view, like, who would you, if in an ideal world, who would you like to see been in that first receiver role for Limerick? If you're forcing somebody to take the ball, to me it would probably be Dan Morrissey. That's just personal opinion. That's not to say he's not uncomfortable on the ball. I just think he's less likely to maybe be as creative as a Nash or a Finn with the ball. I put it to you that way.
And you know what? It's very interesting because Liam Cahill has obviously come up against this Limerick team several times with Waterford, so he may have an idea of what does and doesn't work. I mean, that's not to say that, you know, it's worked for him, because obviously they were beaten every time by Limerick, and by bigger margins the more and more it went on. Because obviously he got to that, wasn't it, the Munster final, and they lost by 4 or 5?
11 in the All-Ireland, wasn't it?
And I think 11 then the semi-final the year after. And then last year lost by, was it maybe 4 or 5 as well?
3. I think it was 3. Was it 30 points to 221 or something like that?
Yeah. So they've had relative success, we'll put it that way. But at least he's been there, he's tried to set the team up against them, so he has an idea of what may work. And I suppose conversely then, John Kiley has an idea of what Liam Cahill likes to do against his team. Now, I'm going to go through a couple of comments here. Tip doesn't have a good midfield, says Fred91. I'd say Conor Stakelum was one of Tipperary's most impressive players last year and looks in serious form this year.
I think he's a real dogged player who's able to chip in with a couple of points as well. Does a lot of on-scene work. Did a bit of niggling against Waterford too.
Yeah, Limerick will start at least 2 or 3 of the new lads, I would think, though. Maybe not. Leonard Tobin says, important yardstick for Tip to see where they're at. Overall conditioning looks vastly improved for them, and they've still got all the scoring capabilities. Porter wonders, Rhys Shelley in goals? Well, he started the last 2 games. Barry Hogan started down in Nolan Park. We don't know. We're just kind of throwing it in based
Shelley
on the
was
Waterford.
injured as well after the Fitzgibbon. Remember that? Funny enough, Dean Mason was named in the Fitzgibbon team of the year, despite only coming, like, his first game, I think, was 15 minutes into the semi-final, but he was that good thereafter. But Shelley had been the keeper before that. As well as that, just what one of the commenters there said about maybe Kiley throwing in a new face. Like, Donegal O'Donnell has been outstanding, you'd have to say. Like, maybe maybe he'll give him, he's had a start already. I think he got 5 points, didn't he, against Westmeath? But maybe he'll throw him in against Tip and maybe not give them too much forewarning of what they're going to meet come summertime. And it's still a dangerous player who you're given an opportunity to, because if O'Brien and English are out of the equation, then he's probably next in the pecking order. He might do something like that, because if it's a case, Kylie knows a lot about his squad. Okay, I'll put it this way. He knows a lot about his 17 or 18, and maybe he needs to learn a little bit more about the likes of an O'Donnell or maybe a Cottle O'Neill or something like that.
Yeah, so TV Street says Dan McCormick on Tom Morrissey. I don't know about that one. Again, we're just speculating based on some of the teams we've seen in recent times. So Dan McCormick played wing back, give or take, against Watford because he was picking up Austin Gleeson. So that shows that they have trust in him to man mark a fairly key guy, which Tom Morrissey is. Now, whether the matchup works, that's another thing.
I'm just after thinking with Dan McCormick. I had a great time for Dan as a player. But if we were doing a top 5 of lads that have an ability to win frees by going like this, we'll have to do it. We'll have to do it someday. Cian Kenny will be in there, Cormac Daly, Dan McCormick. Probably the king will be Pádraig Maher. We'll do it someday. We'll have a very good think about it, even though I don't know if people will take too kindly to it.
No. Leonard Tobin says O'Connor's role is important to try and commit men to stop him and disrupt Limerick's shape and get narrow. Limerick keeping their shape has been a key pillar to their success. Now, Tipperary have been accused of not having pace in recent years and what have you. In this team here now, and I've said it already, I think this is a big test for Mark Keogh because he's shown some good form in the league. There's still times when what frustrates me is he puts the stick to a ball that he could just catch and sometimes spills it on that basis. There's some forwards who do that. Like Jake Morris's pace, Alan Tynan has pace as well to run through the centre, draw a man and pop it off. Seamus Kennedy has pace, but obviously he's not a native forward. So, do you like the mix of that Tipperary forward line? Now, it mightn't be that necessarily that forward line, but do you like the mix of what we're seeing there?
Yeah, it's not a bad little mix. I think Tynan brings a lot of physicality to it. This would be like the biggest test of his career by a country mile, and it'll be interesting to see how he gets on. It's also Seamus Kennedy's role has been, I'd say, quite successful, but again, it's just you're going up a couple of levels here, aren't you? There's a potential for a Gerard O'Connor maybe to not get on a ball for 10 or 15 minutes or get on a ball and be overturned. And that's what kind of Limerick can do to you. So I think Tip are going to learn a hell of a lot about their team and about their squad in this game, because what they're coming up against is up a couple of levels to what they've played so far.
Yeah, and we will find out if Tip are back this weekend. A heavy beating would be the only massive concern for Tip. If Tipperary hurl well and Limerick pull away towards the end or whatever, I still think it's not the end of the world. If Tip win, obviously brilliant. But Limerick will want to grind Tipperary into the floor here, won't they? They'll want to say, hey, Tip, you've had a good little season now, back into your box.
Well, do you know what would be a bit of a disaster from a Tipperary point of view? A Tip team that's been flying throughout the league and, Limerick are 4 or 5 up most of the game and grind them down and win by 8 or 9. And it's kind of familiar failings, shall we say. That would be a bit demoralising from a Tip point of view. But I think there will be a sense of Tip getting a bit of a reality check at different stages throughout the game. And we've talked about, I think Limerick's best attribute by a mile is their ability to kind of overcome various in-game things, and how Tip, because that will happen to Tip at several stages on Saturday afternoon. And it's, if Hayes is marauding up and down the wing and he's after getting 2 points and he's after setting up a goal, how do they deal with that there and then? Not in the video session after. How did they deal with that there and then? Or have they got a ready-made solution to take care of Hayes? There's a lot of questions or a lot of answers are going to be posed to kind of Tip at the weekend, and it's going to be, can they come up with something for a remedy for what they're going to be thrown at, because there's a lot going to be thrown at them, more than what has been thrown at them so far. And I think that's what's fascinating about it. But you do have a Tip team that's flying against a Limerick team that's flying in their own respect as well. And I'm sure, listen, if Limerick have gotten this far, I'm sure they're going to try and push on and try and win a league at this stage. Because it just, again, it builds into the narrative of, oh, a Limerick team at 70% was able to win a league, and how are we going to beat them come championship? Do you know what I mean? You know what I mean? When you have that doubt, when you have that doubt in the rest of the country's minds, basically, they're basically living kind of rent free in most managers' minds and most players' minds at this stage, and that's you try and hold on to that as long as you can.
Like Limerick are able to go into the last 10 minutes of games that are very tight and feel like, look, we'll find a way over the line. We always do. I mean, that's a brilliant thing when you can have that coolness out on the field, and they look like a team that definitely has it. I just want to remind people that we've launched a live club fundraisers. We're going to be doing one in Rowan Moore in just under a month, so that's going to be brilliant. A great way to raise funds for your club for the year. And also, we're brought to you by ourstore.ie, which is the home of the official merchandise for our game. A few other comments coming in here already. Flash, looking forward to the match Sunday. Interested to see how Tipperary under Cahill match up against us. Tip v Clare in the first round is a match as a neutral that I'm really waiting for. They're going to kill each other. They are, aren't they? But this game, I think this is going to be skin and hair flying on Saturday night.
Yeah, no, I think there will be as well. I think it's going to be, I mentioned it on Monday, I think it'll be a lot like the 2018 semi-final where the boot's on the other foot. I think Tip have something to prove. They're the up-and-coming team now. Limerick are the seasoned team. I'm expecting a rip-roaring game, I have to say. I'm expecting 2 good league semi-finals. I know the league hasn't, we've only, we could probably count on one hand the amount of really competitive games we've had so far and real meaningful games where you think teams are giving it everything. I don't expect any shadow boxing really at the weekend. I think all 4 teams will go at it hammer and tongs.
Yeah, Jason Ford has 2 goals from play this year. Jake Morris has 5. Connor Bowe has 3. John McGrath's come back, and like Conor Stakelin was asked in this little clip, it was like a Q&A with Tip GAA the other day, and he was asked, who's the player to watch out for this year? And he said John McGrath. And it was just the manner that John McGrath set up that 3rd goal for Jake Morris against Waterford makes me think, okay, this lad's sharp again. The last few years haven't really been his best, but he's still got serious quality, so I'm wondering how he'll go this weekend.
He got player of the week, I think, last weekend, off the back of a meaningless enough game. Hit 6 points from play. As you said, he was okay against Laois first time out in what was his return game. He's kind of eased back in and looks like he's finding a bit of form. But if you look at it, it's a really satisfying thing from Cattle's point of view. A lot of Tip players are in form, or look like they're in form, shall we say? And it's one thing having a couple of players in form, but when you have a squad in form, they kind of think anything is possible. So I'm looking forward to them getting stuck into Limerick on Saturday. And I expect there to be plenty of niggle as well, particularly from a Tip point of view, because when was the last time Tip beat Limerick? There's a good one for you. Outside of that meaningless round robin game where Bonner and Barrett got injured. When was the last time? Is that league semi-final the last time Tip beat Limerick in a meaningful game?
Yeah, because Tipperary beat Limerick in the league a couple of years ago in Thurles. I think it was the day that Brian O'Mara broke his arm.
They beat them by a point, I think, didn't they? Yeah.
Yeah, it was 2021, but yeah, not overly meaningful. Other than that, did Tipperary play them in 2017? I'm trying to remember. There was like 2016 Tip won, when Bubbles got sent off, but still won the game by 4 or 5. Then the year after, Tip might have won by about 16 points down in the Gaelic grounds. But from then on, I remember, wasn't it 2018? Didn't Pat Ryan score a goal against Tip or was it Barry Murphy might have scored a goal that day? Tip had made 5 changes coming into the game. All the talk was what's going on and all that kind of crack. But a few comments coming in here.
Just the last thing I'd say quickly, Shane, on that is they haven't beaten Kylie's Limerick, really, if you get me, in a meaningful game. That's kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, true. It's true. And I think John Kiley versus Liam Cahill, that's the new managerial super bout that we've seen it a few times in the last few years. Assuming Tip don't kind of fall off the wagon, this could be a great matchup for the next couple of years. Michael O'Keefe says a Tip win would add great spice to the championship. Too many already given Limerick everything. Limerick City is going to be wild crack Saturday night. 2 big games all into the pub right after. Is there rugby on or something?
I don't know.
Rugby on. Okay, says there's rugby there. We have no idea because we absolutely do not care. Thomond Park, yeah. No red cards and no injuries for Limerick. The majority of Limerick fans will be happy. Limerick beat Tip in 2013 and 14, and then Tip won handy in 2015 when Hennessy smashed into Callan. His teeth went flying. Ooh, that was a little bit dog rough. Okay, right. Keep your comments coming in. We'll read them in before the end of the show. But